Good evening.
Good evening.
And welcome to the first attempt that we've done as BCS Coventry Branch in doing our monthly meeting as our webinar. We have 23 attendees, so that's a good sign. I hope you're all going to join in and contribute questions. If you have questions, please contribute them through the question panel on the which you should find on the right hand side, and John and I will sort of manage them and field them to John Honeyball to answer, and we'll just see how this goes. We'll make some time available at the end as well. To introduce our speaker today is John Honeyball. He's a contributing editor to PC Pro magazine. He's also a managing director of Woodleside IT Limited, which is a technical evaluation lab. I'm sure he's going to tell us something about some of his work. I was interested in LinkedIn. He says his speciality is telling clients how bad their products really are, which I thought was very interesting. Oh, somebody's saying, is this audio only? Are people seeing the video? We are displaying a slide saying BCS Coventry at the moment. We'll carry on. If there are some more issues, okay, people have got video, good. Right, so John's presentation, how we gave away our personal data and the apocalypse to come, talking about who owns you on the internet when you've told everybody what you are, who you are. So without further ado, we will pass over to John Honeyball as presenter, and John and I will drop off.
Okay, am I live here? This is hopefully working lovely. Excellent. I'm assuming that I'm broadcasting to the ether, as it were, which is good. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming along. This is a difficult topic. It's a difficult topic because it's very deep and it's very broad. So we're going to cover off quite a lot of areas, and then we'll throw it open to questions at the end. So who am I? John Honeyball. I wear various hats. I'm probably better publicly known for being contributor of PC Pro magazine for the last 26 and a half years when we set up the magazine 314 months ago, whatever that is. I think we're doing issue 315 now. And I've done columns in it and for every issue and so forth. And it's been a fascinating ride watching how computer technology has moved from almost Windows 3 days through to today's cloud and IoT systems. That's not my real job. That's never really been more than a day or so a month for me. I run a consultancy firm and a product test lab. I'm sat in the lab here, and it's actually quite scary when you look at the screen and realize that I've got all sorts of debris behind me. I apologize for that. I probably should have tidied up. But what we do here is we understand how things work. So what makes a good smartphone? What makes a good audio product? What are the things that matter? How does it all go together? How do you evaluate in a consistent way? And as a test lab with clients around the world, we look at probably 500, 600, 700 products a year, hardware and software. It's across quite a wide range of stuff, which is quite scary because we have to be sort of expert in all of them, and so width as well as depth. We are an accredited test lab under ISO 17025, which is a big deal for a lab. It means that we have got all sorts of quality processes and traceability and calibration facilities and all that kind of stuff. So that's what we do. We do it for various people around the world. We sometimes do R&D work, and basically, as I said, we're equally rude to everybody. We curry no favor with anybody. They can come, we'll tell them what we think, and that's what we do. So that's the PC Pro and the lab side of stuff. So I could do sort of a gratuitous advert here, but there's no point because at the end of the day, users are essentially numb to advertising, and that's kind of part of the problem. So topic tonight is how we gave it all away and the apocalypse to come when you are the product. And unfortunately, I'm now going to change my title, The Apocalypse to Come, because the reality is essentially the apocalypse that's already happened. We haven't really seen the true nature of the outcome of what has happened, but in many ways, the future is looking pretty bleak. This is not a future problem. This is a now problem. We effectively are to blame. The IT professionals, the infrastructure people, it's kind of our fault that this has happened. It's been coming for a long time, what's happened. This is not something that's happened in the last couple of years. This has its roots right back to the earliest days of computing and of the internet. In 1999, the Sun Microsystems chief executive Scott McNealy said, "You have zero privacy anyway, get over it." That was 21 years ago. And things have not got better since then. In many ways, they've got a lot worse. And we're dealing here with globally large corporations holding a data set, to all intents and purposes, of the entire population of the world. And they have enormous amounts of money and resource, billions of dollars of cash, which we have given them. And we seem to have willingly given it to them. And here's the underlying problem, that users don't actually seem to care. Users seem to be very happy to do all sorts of things that to us and IT professionals makes us blanch and quiver with fear, but the public will just do it. They will just hand over the most ridiculous pieces of information about themselves and don't bother about it. If you take a normal distribution curve, we all know what the sort of the standard normal distribution curve is. That I've found in my years that there are two curves that seem to matter. One is a normal distribution curve, and the other is the sort of asymptotic curve, or whichever way around you want to do it. And an awful lot of things in the world can be described as either a normal distribution curve or an asymptotic curve. And if you were to look at interest in IT, there's a normal distribution curve, which means that there's the nerds like us down at the very high end of people who really worry and care about this stuff. But there's an awful lot of people on the lower half of the graph who simply don't care, and they're not bothered. And provided it doesn't bite them immediately, it doesn't seem to impact on their daily lives. And they will do the most ridiculous things, and they don't ask the obvious questions. And in a sense, they're the public. They don't need to do that. We should be doing that. But in many ways, my contention here is that we have not only let ourselves down as nerds, we've let down the greater population as well. And there is a fight back. There are things happening about this. We'll come on to that. But I think we need to understand the magnitude, really, of what has happened. Let's just take a few examples. Say you have a smart TV. Smart TV, you've got menus on screen, you can do stuff, and it's going to report back to some data center somewhere. And no one seems to give a damn about this, and they don't think about it. And even if you were to do a packet trace, you might say, this data ends up in a data center in Madrid, and therefore that's in the EU, and therefore that's all lovely. What happens to that data after that point? Does it end up in Moscow? Does it end up in Korea? Does it end up in the United States? Who knows? How do you find out? And the answer is it's very hard. You can ask the manufacturer, you can ask the vendor, the cloud service provider, and they may turn around and say, "Oh, no, everything's just fine. It's not a problem at all." But you don't know, because it's impossible to know. IoT devices, you pop up some sort of clever thing in your house, and there's a whole range of these things now, from things that can process your voice to security cameras to baby monitors to etc. Where does this data go? Are you bothered about it? Is it a problem to you that you might have put a security camera and it's streaming data somewhere and you don't know, and the user is not bothered by this? And that's quite scary. I'm not saying that all vendors are bad. I'm just saying is that there's a great lack of understanding of what's going on here. If you want to remove yourself from these things, the whole concept of what is my data and who's got control of it and what rights do I have over my data is a very tricky conversation that these large corporate vendors do not want to have. They don't want to engage in this. Facebook, for example, says it may take up to 90 days to delete the data. Your information isn't necessarily accessible on Facebook during this time. Google says if you delete your account, you've got 2 to 3 weeks to recover it. So if you got it wrong, you can do it. And then the last octet of the IP address is wiped after 9 months. And after 18 months, Google anonymizes the unique cookie data. But is that enough? Are we having the right conversations about this? So I just wanted to get into a little quick run through of how we kind of got to where we are today. And let's go back to the early days of the web. Tim Berners-Lee, great chap who was at CERN, using a wonderful Next computer, came up with this idea of HTTP, of being able to click between documents, because it was a great way of jumping from one place to another. And that was really, really useful. Except it was not designed with today in mind. It was designed with the needs of academia in mind, and that was fine. But these things grow, and when they grow, they kind of go a little bit crazy, because as soon as you have a lot of documents, you now can't feed everything from static files. You have to feed it by a database. So suddenly we now have a server-side engine that's delivering pages to the client. So we're now getting intelligence on the server side. That really wasn't quite enough. We wanted to start doing stuff server side rather than client side rather than round tripping all the time. So we started to get client side coding happening to allow us to do stuff on the client and have conversations backwards and forwards with the back end. This was really necessary for things like shopping baskets. You want to click and say, I've got this, it's here, and then you might submit something or something along those lines. And then, of course, the great evil arrived, which was advertising. And suddenly I can now sell things to you because I've got your eyeballs, I have your presence, I can use this as a medium, and that's fine. But then things went very downhill from there, which is, well, the value of the advert is now very much defined by the quality of the eyeballs that are looking at the advert at this moment in time. So we had a rise of a new kind of technology, which is basically personalized advertising. So the adverts that come to you are defined by who you are, what you've done, what your interests are, what they out there know about you. And this is now moved forward even further to the concept of real-time brokers. So when you go to a page, there is then a server-side conversation out with sometimes hundreds of people, hundreds of services out on the internet, who will have basically a real-time auction about who you are, the value, who wants to pay for what, and then the advert is then delivered down to you on the basis of it. This is all happening in real time, and the user isn't aware that this is happening, but it's all happening over there. And there is an enormous amount of traffic going on about you. And therefore, identifying who you are and being able to track who you are is the really key point. So this is the new web reality. This is where we are at now. The vision of Tim Berners-Lee at CERN is prehistoric. We have now moved to an area where everything that you're doing on a web page is being examined, brokered, sold, and it's all happening in real time. And I wanted to give you an example of this. So I'm just going to click here and hopefully a little miracle will occur and you can see this web browser. It's Chrome. It's showing the Daily Mail, which, if I'm right, I believe is actually the most visited news website in the world, or some statistics like that I saw. Anyway, it's a very popular, big, updating news website. Now, let me just do a little refresh here and you will see that the whole thing starts to build. The content starts flowing in, things start appearing around on the screen. As things start getting fed in, we've got this little video appearing down here, and I can scroll up and down, and all of this stuff has been built on the fly, and all of it has happened, a great deal of this has happened on the basis of what it knows about me right now. And so it's always very useful to, let's just drop into if I come in here into more tools, into developer tools mode, and let me just refresh this page and start again. Okay, so we're going to start again, and down here in the lower part of the screen is the debug window showing all of the stuff that's flowing in to create this. And if this graphical area you can see here, I don't know if I've got a mouse pointer or not, but this graphical view here of a timeline, I'm scrolling across it here, we're now up to 19-20 seconds of page loading, and there are enormous, 712 requests have happened to build this page on the fly of all this stuff and it's still going on. Here we are at 30 seconds. It's all starting to reload here. And these are conversations that are going on, and an awful lot of this information that's coming down is on the back of conversations that are happening on the server side, as talking off to advertisers and so forth. This is really quite scary because they are using various technologies to identify who I am, do they know me from before, and so on and so forth. And let me just pop over to here, to this view here, and let me just refresh that. Really useful site here, amiunique.org, and it tells you about how this fingerprinting works now. It's a JavaScript canvas fingerprinting, which basically works out from a whole bunch of things that it can learn about your web browser, what's going on, your computer, and so forth, as to who you are, and to a very high accuracy here. So there's a whole bunch of these things. Now, how much memory is there? Is Java enabled? How much screen space there is? What permissions there are? What happens on WebGL data? Do we have localized storage? What audio formats do I support? And all of this builds a fingerprint. And as you can see from the top here, we can see that there are 2.6 million unique fingerprints in this site's data set. And it says that my web browser here is unique in their data set. Therefore, this browser session here that's running can be fingerprinted back to me because it knows who I am with a very high confidence level. This is quite worrying. There are tools here. In fact, actually, it'll actually take a version of my fingerprint history here, and I can work. I actually installed this tool into this browser this afternoon, which I've only got data for today, but I can compare and say, I changed some audio and video input earlier on, obviously because I was going to headset for this, and it's changed my fingerprint very slightly, but I'm now trackable because I can go from one confidence state to another. Let's just go back to our Daily Mail site here, which is still, as you can see, flowing data in. This is a gigabit fiber line direct to data centers in London. So I'm not constrained by bandwidth here. And there is an awful lot of stuff going on here, and it will just keep churning away and churning away and churning away. Now, there are some things that you can do to help. I can, for example, turn on various add-ins like AdBlock Plus, Decentralize, Ghostery, Privacy Badger. And if we now come back here and refresh, you will see we get a very different picture in the graphical view here, much, much lighter, and lots of red in the bottom here because an awful lot of stuff is now being blocked. If we look at Ghostery here, it's telling us it's blocking 25 trackers in advertising. How many of these companies have you heard of? Have you ever heard of Triple Lift or Skim Links or Criteo, or you've probably heard of Google Analytics, Scorecard Research Beacon? Let's have a look here. 208 items blocked on this page by AdBlock Plus. If I look here at Privacy Badger, which is from EFF, again, there's a whole bunch, 37 potential trackers on this page. Is that actually appearing here? It doesn't appear that it's appearing on the screen share, but up here at the top, I've got these add-ins that are reporting to me what's going on. And I have now taken control. I have now removed all the advertising. I've taken control of my viewing of this page. Now, there is an interesting point here, which is, whose page is it? Am I the consumer of this page, or am I actually the object that's being sold out to this big industry in the background? And that's a very interesting and important question that we have to answer. Obviously, websites cannot exist for free, but how am I being monetized? Do I know how I'm being monetized? And I think this is a conversation that's frankly long overdue. Let me come back out of stop showing screen and come back to here. I should be back to video now. So the value to the user as sold by the industry is that I'm getting a more personalized experience. I'm going to be targeted with adverts that are relevant to me. I'm not going to see a whole bunch of things that aren't relevant to me. And that, at first glance, sounds like a really nice kind of funky, fun idea. The problem is this kind of insidious fingerprinting of people does have its significant downsides. Because where does this data go? Do I have any kind of control of this view of me? So there are two big players in this space where I'm going to concentrate on now, Google and Facebook. Google is an advertising engine. Facebook is an advertising engine. That's it. That's what they do. That's what they exist to do. And they are basically effectively hyper-information superstates. What I mean by that is these are global corporations that are bigger than any local legal basis. They're bigger than countries, they're bigger than nation states, they're bigger than organizations like the EU. Google has 92% of the searches that happen on the internet worldwide today, according to StatCounter. Bing is 3%, Yahoo 1.5%, and so forth. And there are various ways of measuring this. Let's not argue about the precise percentages, but the reality is that Google owns that entire space. Google does, according to their figures, approximately 70,000 searches per second, just under 6 billion a day, 2 trillion a year searches. Data mining that is the key to their business model. Their 2020 revenues, $160 billion or so from the advertising industry. Where you appear on a Google search has a material impact on your business if you're trying to get in contact with customers who are trying to find you, and getting the right place in there, that's where the money is. And Google will do whatever is necessary in order to keep that golden nugget of data. For example, Google Chrome in the past has actually ignored your DNS settings that you may have set up, and will actually, if possible, go directly to their own DNS servers in order to be able to log what's going on. Facebook, in 2010, it had a 1.9 billion turnover. It's basically doubled on over doubled every year. 2012, 5.1 billion, 2014, 12.4, 2016, 27 billion, 2017, 40 billion, this year, 70 billion. And here's where the really scary statistic is. Facebook currently has approximately 2.7 billion active users. There are about 7.6 billion people in the world in 2020, give or take a bit. And approximately 1 billion of those 7.6 billion people do not have access to electricity. If you take off the 1 billion off the 7.6, you get to 6.6, 2.7 is nearly 3. So approximately 40 to 50% of the world's population has an account of some sort on Facebook. That's quite terrifying. What's even more terrifying, of course, is that Facebook isn't just happy to do that. They are all in the business of working out the relationships between people, because if you know somebody, you can then walk through maps to find other people. They will, of course, find people who have somebody else in common, but that person doesn't have an account, and they basically create a phantom account. So they know things about people who don't even have Facebook accounts, because they have inferred this through the data mining engine. Population of the United States, approximately 327 million at the moment. Facebook audience in the United States is 223 million, roughly. So that's 68% of the United States population of all ages. Let's not talk about Cambridge Analytica. Let's not talk about the data pipe that Facebook has allowed organizations to use. This is a fairly well trodden thing, but the fundamental point here is that Zuckerberg is absolutely determined under any circumstances to keep the advertising engine going, because that is the monster that feeds the monster that is Facebook. And he's basically in his own little disconnected private world, where he will remain for as long as he's useful to the major backers. However, he is, at the last count I checked, he owns 18% of the shareholding, but he has 60% of the voting rights. That was a few months ago. I don't think it's changed since. So Facebook is all about trying to get as much as possible out of you to feed into this data engine. Forget about what they give you. It's about getting the data to them, because that's then has the value. Tim Cook of Apple, something that will come through this is, of the companies out there who are global sized, Apple is one who I do actually have some regard for in terms of the work they're trying to do on privacy. Tim Cook said, the truth is we could have made a ton of money if we monetized our customer. If our customer was our product. We've decided not to do that. And when he was asked what would he do if he was Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg, he replied, I wouldn't be in this situation, because Apple is a company that understands that the customer data and privacy is one of the major points that it has going for it. What about these new companies that are arising? TikTok. Oracle appears to be the one buying into that, though the thought of that is really quite astonishing, makes my head explode. These are data mining large populations, emerging populations. Facebook will not be around forever. And in a sense, Google will not be around forever. These things do tend to come and go, but there will be new emerging platforms. In the case of, for example, Instagram, that is actually a Facebook property. So why have we got to this point? How have we got to this point that there are these enormous global-sized organizations who are there, whose sole raison d'etre is to know as much as possible about everybody? And the reality is that we like things that are free. We like things to be very cheap. We don't want to get hammered by paying for everything. And if someone will offer something for free, the people go for it. And they don't seem to be terribly worried about what they hand over in order to get it for free. And we now have a generational problem of people under the age of 30, who grew up with the internet being something that was always there, for whom stuff is free and it is their right for it to be free. Those of us with grey hair and grey beards and stuff who remember before the internet will know how strange that is as a concept. So this is where we have got to, and this is very dangerous. This is very worrying. Let me give a couple of examples of this, and the ways that some of the companies in this space work with this and respond to this. Medical records. Whose is your national health record? Who does that belong to? Is it yours? No. Nominally, it actually is owned legally, kind of, by Her Majesty the Queen, but it's effectively owned by the Secretary of State for Health. What happens to that data? Who looks at it? Who has access to it? And you might say, well, of course, this is all going to be perfectly fine. How could possibly be a problem? September 2019, Royal Free London NHS Foundation Trust, Imperial College Healthcare NHS Trust, Taunton and Somerset NHS Foundation Trust, Moorfields Eye Hospital, University College London NHS Foundation Trust, all signed together a data commitment to hand over large amounts of data to Google Health for their DeepMind AI data mining project. Royal Free said, and I quote here, as with all of our arrangements with third parties, Royal Free London remains the data controller in relation to all personal data. This means we retain control over that personal data and are responsible for deciding how that data is used to the benefit of patient care, which is all very lovely, except for one big problem. Why does Google want this data? The answer is they want their data for DeepMind and other similar types of services to train AI engines, which is interesting. And there is clearly an upside to this. If you can take a whole bunch of things like scans and then feed them into an AI engine, you can start very rapidly processing out that data to a very high level of confidence, and that's a good thing. Hopefully mistakes will be less than they are with poor human beings who have to make these very difficult decisions. But what about the knowledge in the AI engine? Who does that belong to? Does that belong to the NHS? It's pretty unclear. It seems actually that it belongs to DeepMind. That's very valuable stuff. Companies will do the most ridiculous things given the opportunity. We were looking a while ago at a internet-connected Hoover. Now, you might say, my goodness me, why would you want an internet-connected Hoover? And the answer is, well, they built one. In their privacy policy, Hoover said, the controller reserves the right to change, update, add, or remove parts of this privacy policy at its discretion and at any time. The interested party, i.e. you or me, has the responsibility to check periodically for any changes. In other words, they can change the contract about what they're doing on privacy, and it's my job to keep watching them to see if they've changed anything. They don't have any responsibility to tell me. They don't have to ask my opinion. They don't have to ask my approval. They have the right to change it, and they maintain it's my responsibility to keep checking as to what's happening and whether I'm happy with that. This is a bit crazy. This is a bit madness. When you take this kind of like view about user data by corporations, whether it's simplistic like the data rights of what your Hoover is doing, let alone something big and terribly scary like Facebook and Google, we have a really big problem here because no one is actually standing up and saying, hold on, I'm not really happy with that. I just bought this product and I'm now being asked to sign up to this, but that wasn't quite my expectation. So we have basically got industrial superstates. Where is my data? Do I have a right to have it deleted? And if so, where is it deleted from? If I was to go to Google and say, remove this data, does it go from the first level data centers? What about the backups? Do I have the right to remove my stuff from the archive mechanism? I know it's difficult, but it's still my data that's being held. So what can we do? Where do we go with this? And the reality is it's actually far too late. There is far too much information out there about far too many people who have essentially no control over it, no access to see what it is, no access to see how it's being used, no access to see how things are being bolted together or how decision-making processes are happening on the client side, on the server side. The legal frameworks for handling this are coming. Some are in place, GDPR, for example. GDPR is interesting, it has teeth. It's still early days. What is the legal framework that you signed up to when you said, I accept? Is it the laws of California? Is it the laws of the UK? Do I have a right as a UK user of Google to have my court case held here in the UK, or am I suddenly got to go to Delaware? Who knows? Do I have the right to control this? Now, there are some interesting moves going on. The EU is waking up to what you might view as the United States data superstate. They're asking questions about the default rights. They're asking questions about right of removal. They're asking questions about local taxation on revenue raised by country, rather than shoveling it all off to some tax haven and paying no tax there. There are questions being asked about Google sells advertising in the UK. Should that income be taxed rather than the profit that's declared here in the UK? And these are hard, difficult questions which are not easily answered. And the problem is that the legislative framework for this is very behind. Here's the sort of latest interesting problem here. So we have in the UK something that's just been rolling out now, which is the UK Digital Services Tax, which was a 2% tax for, and I quote, large businesses with a global revenue of more than 500 million, of which more than 25 million is attributable to UK sales, i.e. the big players. And it was a 2% tax that will be charged to those companies. What has Google just said? They have just added a 2% levy on top of their advertising costs for UK advertisers on Google, effective 1st of November. So the attempt to put a tax onto Google in the UK using the UK Digital Services Tax has just basically passed the money straight on to the people who are trying to use the advertising platform. Google themselves are not funding this at all. This needs work. This needs urgent work. This needs something sorting out. We need the ability for people to say this end user license agreement is opaque, written in language that is not understandable by anybody who isn't a QC, and it's nonsense. You can't apply this kind of thing and have a means by which this can be rolled back and handled and, if necessary, publicly shamed in the company into doing this stuff. We need the users to be massively more cynical about what they're doing and why and the value of it, and to have some sort of an understanding of what's going on here. And we are, as the IT people, we are very bad at explaining this to the man in the street, that handing over vast amounts of information to a Facebook or a Google or some other service provider is actually not a really good idea. We need ombudsmen with teeth. Recently, I think it was last week, Ireland's Data Protection Commissioner issued Facebook with a preliminary order to stop Facebook sending data for EU users to the United States. This was confirmed by Facebook that it had happened. And this is a well-progressed thing. It's a result of the European Court decision in July, which basically struck down the transatlantic Privacy Shield treaty and said it wasn't legally valid in Europe. And what this means is the validity of something called SCCs, which is a standard contractual clause, and is used by an enormous number of Irish and European companies with American companies to allow transfer of data over to the United States into data centers and services and so forth. It's closer to being cancelled as a mechanism. Facebook, of course, has turned around and said this is a really bad idea and the world will come to an end and so forth, because they're terrified by something like this happening. Another thing that's happening, I talked about Apple. In iOS 14 that's released today, Apple is putting in a new mechanism, and they have decided under intense pressure over the last few weeks not to roll this out today, but to roll it out in a month or two's time. And it is something that they're calling IDFA, which is ID for advertisers. And the idea here is that Apple says that Apple customers are customers of Apple. They're not customers of these third parties. And therefore, it's Apple's job and duty and mission to protect the customers from what these third parties are doing. And what that does is that basically when an app tries to do tracking of a user on an app on iOS, iOS will pop up a dialog and says, and I quote, App X would like permission to track you across apps and websites owned by other companies. Your data will be used to deliver personalized ads to you. Do you want this or not? And everybody knows that the great majority of Apple customers are probably going to say, no, thank you. Don't want that. No. The advertising industry is apoplectic about this because they believe that it is their absolute right to data mine all of the traffic and to do whatever they like with it. And Apple is saying, no, you can't do that. What's going to come from this? Well, Apple are going to implement this. The web industry is probably going to move on from fingerprinting, like I showed you, to other mechanisms by which they can try to work out who you are. And this is now open warfare between the people who are worried about privacy and those people who simply want to data mine anything they can get their sticky fingers on. We will probably see a move whereby the kind of the fingerprinting things I showed you earlier, we'll get browsers that will basically just lie. They'll just randomly make up numbers and throw them back and say, oh, my screen is 4 miles wide and it's in purple. And oh no, oh no, it's now this big and it's that big and so forth. And they will do this on a page load by page load basis in an attempt to try and obfuscate who the user is so that they can't be tracked and data mined and therefore have an enhanced value attached to them. There is a very interesting conversation point I wanted to drop on here, which was about the COVID app and the track and trace. Now, to my enormous surprise, I must say, Google and Apple got into bed together and said, we don't like what centralized governments want to do in terms of tracking users using their Android or iOS devices, and this is a fundamental right of the user to have their privacy. We're also in a pandemic, and balancing this is incredibly difficult, and it gets very passionate and very quickly. But it turned out that actually trying to do this kind of centralized thing wasn't going to work, and Apple and Android and Google did their very best and have done their very best to prevent this happening by providing a framework in the operating systems by which relationships and pinging can go on such that you can that a person who then returns a positive test can then be able to identify and notify the other people that they have come into potential contact with. This, of course, is not what the NHS wanted. The NHS wanted a grand GPS tagging, tracing thing by which all of this data could be hoovered up into a great big database. In fact, in the early days of this, they were saying that they thought 20 years sounded like a good time period to hang on to this stuff. And it hasn't come to pass. I'm in two minds about this. Although obviously you can probably tell, I'm avidly interested in security and data integrity and my ownership of my stuff. We also have a pandemic to worry about, and balancing this is really difficult. But I'm quite passionately of the view that this was not for governments to suddenly try and leap onto a platform and say, oh, you're going to do this for us. That's not how the world works and shouldn't work. So how are we going to move forward from this? The first thing is that users need to start to understand what is happening. And that's difficult because if we take that normal distribution curve, you can also apply it to interest in privacy. And so therefore, half of the population simply don't care. And they just say, yeah, whatever, I don't care. Is it free? Can I send a message to my friend? That's okay. I don't care what happens in the meantime. I don't care who has taken that photo I've just taken and is now data mining it and comparing it to other people, and it's now feeding into a facial recognition system that's being sold to the police. I don't care. It doesn't matter. You know, that's not sustainable in a longer term. And in a sense, one of the things that we do is that we pay our politicians to worry about these big things and to ensure that we don't do things that we don't understand but which are detrimental to the broader public. Getting people not to hand out everything about them is a tricky problem, but it's something we need to start doing and start doing now. The problem is the apocalypse, and I take no delight in saying this because truthfully, at the end of the day, we've lost at least one generation. The current users of these platforms who have not been data careful have basically handed it all over, and it's gone. It's there, it's out there, these companies have it, and they're not going to give it up anytime soon. And this is almost a generational problem. And it's worse because we now have a generation of people who grew up with these services, who grew up with these technologies, and that's just how they think the world works. And we need to somehow explain to them that it isn't how it works, and they need to be doing something about it. We need to tackle this real big problem, which is pay for curation. It's not enough just to have everything splurging at you for free. We need people to understand that they need to go to places that they trust and set up webs of trust, and therefore go to somewhere whose opinions they trust, not just because they resonate the same strange views that they held themselves, but that this is a reputable place and the data on it is reputable. And here's the problem. The vast majority of the data that's out there has no reputational value to it at all. And that is really quite terrifying. That's how these strange memes happen, that electrosensitivity, that 5G is causing all of these terrible problems. I had an acquaintance, I certainly wouldn't call them a friend, in the pub in my village last week, regaling me as to how 5G was terrible and it has to be shut down, and because it was giving them headaches. And I pointed out that there is no 5G in our village. The nearest 5G is 60 miles away, probably 80 miles away for London. And we're up in Fenlands here, north of Cambridge. There is no 5G here. EE doesn't have 5G. Vodafone doesn't have 5G. There is no 5G, but nevertheless, 5G is a really big problem for these people. This is a really big problem because engineering has been sort of debased in the UK. In the 1980s and the financial services moved an awful lot of people who would have done engineering into financial services. And there is another whole long discussion about what happened and the view of engineering in the UK. And let's not go there, but I leave that thought parked with you as to what can we do to try and fix this kind of a problem. Another problem I want to leave with you, just touch on at the end here, is anonymity. And anonymity is actually a very big part of the problem that we're dealing with now. And anonymity was great because we didn't need to know who you were, and people would dislike the whole idea of digital ID cards and the government will be tracking you and all this sort of stuff. That's bad. That's bad data. What we need is to get rid of anonymity, and here's the reason why. Anonymity allows and amplifies the problems that we have on Twitter and Facebook and so forth, because anybody can go there, create an account, it's unverified, and they can say whatever they like. And this is like an enormous amplification foghorn problem, because they can also meet other people who have the same wacky, crazy ideas, and the whole thing just multiplies out of control. We actually need to get rid of anonymity. Now, people will say, yes, but okay, anonymity is really important. Yes, anonymity is very important for certain cases. For example, if you are contacting the Samaritans, it is clearly hugely important that anonymity is there and anonymity is preserved, because it is a total cornerstone of how those services work. For chatting on Twitter or Facebook or whatever like that, anonymity is not useful. Anonymity is actually a significant element of the problem. And we actually need to tackle this problem if we're going to move forward. We need to come up with a framework by which people can be not anonymous. They can be identifiable, and identifiable in a legal way. Because if you do that, you have to then take responsibility for what you're doing. And you can't say, well, I want to go into this space and be anonymous, but I get very angry if someone says something very nasty about me. And how dare they do that if I don't know who they are? Well, okay, those are two sides of the same coin. If everybody is anonymous, then this is the problem that we're faced with. We need a framework by which identity can be managed by me. My identity should be owned by me, not by Facebook, not by Twitter, not by the UK government, not by Google. My identity should be something that is recognizably owned by me and traceable to me. And this would allow a quite wonderful thing to happen, which is what I call the separation of oil and water. If you take the internet as a space at the moment, let's say we could split it in half between the identified space and the anonymous space. Now, as I said before, I am not for one moment saying that all anonymous use of the internet is a bad thing. There are clearly special cases and exceptions where anonymity is really important. That does not remove the crushing reality that an awful lot of that anonymous traffic is actually probably bad, and not the kind of stuff that I, as a right-thinking kind of normal person, really wants to dip into, unless I want to put myself into a mode where I dip into it for whatever reason. It could be for good reasons, I want to talk to the Samaritans. It could be for bad reasons, I want to go to Pirate Bay and download a movie. But let's at least have that conversation, because the great many people, for a great many material amount of the time, would actually quite like to be able to filter out everything that is anonymous, because by doing so, we would suddenly take our control of our internet usage. It would kill spam. It would kill malware. It would kill just so much stuff drops out when we talk about an identifiable space and identifiable services. This is not an easy thing to do. There are frameworks that we're working on how to do this, and this is a whole different huge topic which I could spend hours talking about. I just want to raise the point with you, which is that the kind of default assumption that anonymity is a necessity is not correct. And the more you think about it, the more ridiculous the anonymous working of this wonderful global space that we have is completely impossible to defend and to move forward with, because it is underlying so many of the problems. And companies and software providers are hugely to blame here. Try setting up digital signing of email in Exchange 365, in Office 365, and it's a nightmare. Try getting digital signing to say this email actually came from this person, its contents are this, and it hasn't been changed. I'm not talking about encryption, I'm just talking about digital signing. It's a nightmare. Why is it a nightmare? Because no one is actually terribly bothered about fixing that problem. This problem has to get fixed, and fixed soon. We should be seeing grown-up companies do digital signing of their emails as a matter of course, and they're not doing it. And this is madness. It is completely crazy that this is the case, and we need to do something about this. We need trustworthy computing, and we don't have it at the moment. We need, I was asked the question recently, who do you trust out there? Who are the trustworthy people? Who are the untrustworthy people? Well, you probably will gather that I don't view Facebook and I don't view Twitter as being trustworthy. If you look at the Twitter sphere, they have that little blue tick thing, which is this is an authenticated user. The proportion of Twitter users who are authenticated is, or I think, fractions of a fraction. It's almost non-existent. In fact, if you go to Twitter and say, I want to go through the process of authenticating my account, they say, we're not doing that at the moment. No. You cannot set up an authentication mechanism for your Twitter account. If you're a corporate or you're somebody who matters to Twitter, there is a mechanism to do it. But you, as a man in the street with your Twitter account, can't do it. This is crazy, and they have to tackle this and do something about it. Microsoft, pretty trustworthy. Microsoft of today is very different to Microsoft of the old, and I take my hat off. They trip and they stumble and they do some really crazy batshit things, but at the end of the day, Microsoft today is a pretty trustworthy company, and I take my hat off to the work that they have done. Apple, pretty trustworthy company. Everybody else, not really sure, because it's impossible to know. And if you don't know, why assume that they're okay? So at this point, with my 5 minutes to go, I think probably what I should do is shut up and have a drink, because my throat's killing me, and hand over back to John and Peter, and firstly say thank you very much for listening to this rant. I wanted to try and raise thoughts. I don't have answers. No, I'm sorry. I wish I had a magic wand I could wave here and say, kaboom, this is all now fabulous. It isn't like that. I just wanted to raise some of the big issues because I think it is critically important that we as the computer professionals start having this discussion, start thinking about what can be done, and actually start doing it, and start communicating this out in the broader way to the broader public to say, this matters, this is a big deal, and we have lost a generation at least. And what are we going to do about it? And that means, batting down the front doors of our politicians to say, I know you're busy with COVID. However, can we please have a conversation about this because this matters? And we've got to start now, because if we don't start now, when on earth are we going to start? So on that note, which I know is not very happy and upbeat, but on that point, I'm going to shut up and hand back over to Peter and John. I'm not sure whether I need to click something. Oh no, he's reappeared. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. Yeah, so we have some questions coming through. If we can get the technology to work, then we might as well try and get some people to ask their own questions. But before we do that, I will pick one or two out of here, because let's start with the fan mail. So right at the start, we had one from Tim Burrow who says, I've read every one of the 313 PC Pro Mags, so I think you ought to have that.
Well, thank you very much, obviously, yes.
Matthew O'Keefe, I'm going to try and let's see if I can unmute you. Matthew raised a couple of questions,
Sure.
some of which, let me send unmute. Some of which you covered, but so if Matthew's there, would you like to re-ask your questions?
Hello, Matthew.
Is this going to work?
Do we have a Matthew?
If not, then I will read some of them.
Earth calling planet Matthew. Okay.
Okay, so let's So one of them here is, what are your thoughts on new phone and web apps that offer the opportunity to users to actively sell their data? Are these any better or worse than users unknowingly sharing their data by using websites or applications and being tracked?
Interesting question. I think I don't mind what users do. It's not my data, it's their data. Yeah. And if somebody wants to do this and get rid of you for it, that's fine. The important point is that they know what they're doing and that they know what the deal is. Yeah. And if someone wants to set up some app or a service or whatever and sign up to it, and it's a bit like, for example, spare CPU cycles I'm going to use on my computer to do something. Well, that's fine. I don't mind, provided you are aware of what you are doing and the consequences of it. If that's what you want to do, absolutely fine. It's not for me. I'm not trying to police anything here. I'm not trying to set some sort of moral standard or high watermark. I'm just saying is that the man in the street who isn't technically savvy, that lower half of that normal distribution curve, they don't know what's going on. And if you sit them down and explain it to them, some of them still won't care. And that's fine. I'm not trying to be religious about this, and I'm not trying to save people from themselves. At the end of the day, everyone has to take their own responsibility for what they're doing. The worrying part is I suspect that an enormous number of people in the middle of that normal distribution curve, especially on the lower side of it, don't know what's going on and don't know the consequences of what's happening. And when you explain it to them, they kind of get it and say, oh, that's probably not what I actually thought was happening. And they're not going to change their habits overnight. They're not going to change what they're doing overnight. But we at least need to try and have the conversation. So if someone wants to sell CPU time on their phones or some service they're signing up to, whatever, absolutely fine by me, provided they know what's happening and what they're doing with it. And that it's the clarity of the contract, both explicit and implicit and so forth. That's the piece which we don't have at the moment.
Okay, thank you. So another slightly more technical question here. Are zero knowledge proofs a viable way to protect identity moving forward? The differing approaches to COVID-19 track and trace systems come to mind on how these complex issues can be handled or not handled.
Well, again, I don't mind what the methodology is, zero method proof, etc., etc. I'm not bothered by that. The issue is, what is it? Who's got the data? What can they do with it? Yeah. Um, uh, there will be new methods. There will be new. This is an evolving thing. In 5 years' time, as the CPU power goes up, the power in your phone goes up, cryptography capabilities improve, hardware, secure enclaves, and so forth happen. This is not a fixed problem that is a solution today that will move forward for 10, 15 years. The important point is that where has my stuff gone to and who is doing what with it? And the reality is that these global superstate companies do not want to engage in the conversation of what's going on. Now, at the end of the day, if there's one thing that reassures me, is that at the end of the day, we, the nerds, will win. Okay? Because we only need to get sufficiently annoyed that we will do something about it. Now, I'm on Facebook. And a few years ago, I quite famously said in my column, if I end up on Facebook, would someone please come around and shoot me? And I'm on Facebook, but my Facebook account is hugely locked down. I've gone through every single security setting and I've locked it down and I know exactly what's going on. And most importantly, I know every single person who is a friend on Facebook and I know them as a person. There's probably only about 4 that I've not met in person at some point. Okay, because one lives in British Columbia and I've never met them, but I've known them and chatted to them for 5 or 10 years. So they're kind of like a virtual friend, and I'm happy with that. Other people just seem to collect friends like sweeties, and it's almost like a badge of honor, especially for younger people. Oh, I've got 600 friends. I've got 3,000 friends. Therefore, I'm a more important person. And this is nonsense. We have to try and educate that this isn't the case. So I don't mind these services, but it's what's going on and how do we interact with them, how do we use them. The technology, I don't mind. Now, if the nerds win, if we decide that we actually are going to get annoyed with Facebook and decide to leave, me and my cabal of nerdy friends. I mean, most of us actually go back to the early days before the internet on a system called KIX, Conflict Information Exchange, which was the big London nerdy bulletin board that was back then. If we get upset, we will probably just game the system. And the current favorite one is to do embedding of data into as a wave function into the noise floor of images. So if you don't know what the wave function is, you can't recover it terribly easily. And we will probably just encode everything into video streams. And we will probably just drop it all publicly onto YouTube and have them as cat videos, because people love cat videos. And if YouTube is perfectly happy to store our meaningless cat videos, that's perfectly fine. But if we know what the video is and we know what the wave function is, we can extract the data out from it. We will win in the end of the day. The question is, what is the effort required to do that, and is it reasonable at the moment? At the moment, if you're wanting to be careful, I showed you some tools earlier. There's a whole bunch of privacy things you can put into your browser. You can carefully choose your browser. You could use, for example, Microsoft Edge, which is from the Chromium source, or Firefox rather than Google. You don't have to use Google's DNS servers. You might use something else, etc., etc., etc. You can put plugins in. You can manage your cookies. You can manage your browser state and so forth. There's a lot of things you can do today. At the moment, kind of the risk-reward ratio is kind of okay if you're prepared to put a bit of work in. If that changes, we will just nerd up even further and lock things down further. So at the end of the day, the nerds will win.
Okay. Question here now from Tom Svalas. Is the UK generally interested in making strides to improve and maintain privacy, seeking to better the EU's approach, or does the EU exit furnish it with the freedom with which it seeks to operate with the US away from the prying eyes of EU?
Pass. I mean, that's not being a particularly political point. As my friends will back me up by saying that I'm as I said earlier, I hate all products. I hate all politicians. I don't care if they're Hugh, because I just don't really seem to get on with politicians as a group. So what's going to happen? I don't know. What's going to happen with data? I don't know. What's going to happen with TTIP? What's going to happen with GDPR in the UK? after Brexit? I don't know. The current plan is that we will continue doing GDPR compliant stuff. How that's going to move over the years, I don't know. What would be good, pardon me, would be for us in the UK to go beyond those standards and to do more. Whether that's going to happen, whether that's politically possible as opposed to technically desirable, I don't know. It would be really quite nice to, I'm not in any way happy with what happened with the Google 2%. It was an attempt by the government, maybe unbelievably naive, but it was an attempt by the government to slap a digital services tax on, and their response is, well, they just jack their prices up. Okay. What we actually need is the legislators to legislate, but they can only legislate on the back of really understanding what's going on here. And my terrifying fear is they don't have a clue. They really don't understand this. And until they do understand this, it's not possible to move the legislation forward because it'll have to be legislated for. And I have to say, and again, this is absolutely not a political thing, but the way that data and information has been handled since February doesn't fill me with an enormous amount of glee or hope for the future. But we have to keep working at this, because if we don't work on this, who is?
Okay. A question from Margaret Lowe. Do you have ideas about how we educate users? Mozilla does a lot of work to educate people about the issues you raise, privacy, digital rights,
Yep.
But sometimes they seem to be a lone voice.
Yep. And they're a lone voice because, Google has the market share. And it's Google is an advertising engine, and it's not in Google's interests, financial interests, to make this easy. The easiest solution at the moment is, and I'm not putting them on any kind of pedestal, they're kind of like the least worst, but Apple seems to be having a crusade, which does appear to be having teeth, and they are actually standing up as board members and saying, we're not going to do this, we're not going to hand over data, we're not going to allow people to data mine our customer base, and so forth. Is that good? No, not in all circumstances, but it's better than what an awful lot of other people are doing. Holding these people to account is really difficult. I think we actually need to start in the classroom. I think we need to do, digital wisdom is something that absolutely should be being taught to children. Children that are not teenagers. I mean, this should be part of core curriculum, because it's not going to go away, and this should be part of our 3 R's of moving forward. That people should understand what's going on, and value of data and privacy, and the fact that once it's gone out there, you can't get it back. This is stuff that should be being taught absolutely from the earliest age. How you do that, I don't know.
So to add on to that, I have another question here from Jenny Reese, who says, thank you for the presentation. I'm currently working on cybersecurity with my year 8s, and this is a big area for me. I've spent 2 hours today scaring them into thinking about protecting their data. Is there anywhere I can find age-appropriate information to share with them, show them to demonstrate where their data goes? They are 12, 13 years old.
I don't know. I think this is massively important. As I just said, thank you for doing this. This is hugely important. This is absolutely something where, if I can bang the sponsors gong here, this is absolutely something that BCS should be doing. The BCS should be absolutely crusading for this sort of stuff and getting the information collated and put out there. The BCS has got more than enough clever people in it to put this out, and they should be targeting every single school. Maybe this is happening, I don't know. I don't work in the educational space, and I'm hugely thrilled to hear that this is happening. But is 11 and 12-year-olds a bit too late? I don't know. This is a difficult topic. We also need very much to be educating parents about the capabilities that they have got in the devices that they have, that they are giving to children, to say, actually, do you know what parental lock is and how it works and how you should be using it? And I will not accept the view that, oh, it's all too difficult, they'll just work a way around it and so forth. I mean, maybe they will, but we have to be doing something, and something is better than nothing.
Okay, so we have so some of the questions are sort of repeating some of these things. So somebody asked if the presentation will be available. Yes, it is being recorded and it will be posted online, so you'll be able to access that. I think the BCS take a day or two just tidying it up, and it'll be available, and you'll be sent an email as through the Eventbrite system to tell you where that is. Okay, a couple of others. Why are you on Facebook for your friends rather than your friends joining platforms such as Diaspora or Mastodon or whatever? That's more secure platforms.
Again, unfortunately, this is a matter of you've got to move a community, and it's not one community. We're talking here about multiple overlapping communities, and so I can't just turn around to all of my friends and just say, "Bye, we're off over here." You know, these things will move and migrate, and it's a matter of getting in that community of people who are quite technically literate to say, actually, do we still really want to be here? Can we have this discussion about this? And I have actually been started doing this, of pointing out what's going on, and tools like FB Purity and stuff like that to help manage your Facebook experience and so forth. And I suspect that actually, in terms of my Venn diagram of my friends and communities, we will probably start moving to other solutions. Which one, how, and so forth, or not? It will not be a case of which one. It will have to be a case of multiples, and how we're going to manage that and so forth. But there is no there is no great desire to stay where we are. It just happens at the moment, with the right tools, to be a reasonable way of doing it if people are locking stuff down. I certainly wouldn't discuss anything super confidential on Facebook or on even a private chat window on Twitter. There are other solutions that are far better for things like that, and we're using them. So it's a matter of where the center of the mass goes. But yes, there are other things coming, and I'm afraid to say there are only 47 hours in the day. And things like Diaspora and so forth, they're great things. I've looked at some of them, and do they have enough of what's necessary to make the move as seamless and as low friction for as many people as possible? This is, again, part of the problem.
And combining two questions here. So one of them was about is the GPG signing system foolproof enough to be made user friendly, and could it be made available for a population wide web of trust, for example? But then sort of following up from the other thing that you said is a statement or a comment: John, nerds cannot win this battle because they haven't won the battle to make email secure. And I guess which is what a lot of the GPG kind of things all about.
Well, I agree. I mean, I tried actually to deploy digital signing on our Office 365. We've got a whole bunch of E3 accounts, which are sort of fairly big things. So we have hosted Exchange 365 in Office 365, and it's a very good system, very much so. I love it. It's great. I went to my administrator page on Office 365 about a year or so ago and said, I want to digitally sign all the emails on my domains here, and there was nothing. Then I went off and looked at Komodo in order to build the digital certificate, and it was an absolute terrifying nightmare of some of the nastiest website creation and management of digital certificates you could ever want to meet. And then I downloaded the right certificate. I had to use the right browser, of course, because not all browsers can download digital certificates. And my head was starting to thump at this point. And this is going back about 18 months, 24 months or so. And so I applied the digital certificate to Microsoft Outlook, and that was great. I was now digitally signing. So I went to my iPhone and I looked at Outlook for iOS. And at the time, it didn't support digital signatures, digital signing. And it was like, hold on, this is the Outlook client from Microsoft for iOS, and I can't digitally sign emails. I know things have moved forward and so forth, but why is this just so horribly difficult? And the response from Microsoft seems to be, well, it's not a high priority because people aren't asking us. We should be asking. We should be saying this is not a grown-up solution unless it can be digitally signed, because this is necessary. And yes, it should be. Tick, turn it on. Oh, charge me an extra $10 this month for doing it, for generating a signature. I don't care. Just make it happen. And the problem is we are hamstrung with so many pieces of infrastructure that were designed 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and never actually meant to do this. And this is part of the conversation that we need to be having.
Okay. We have a suggestion from Adrian Pauling of a BCS of a site regarding resources for primary schools, which is
Sure.
www.barefootcomputing.org. So if anybody's interested in that, we'll go and have a look at that. There's a comment on things like ad blocker. Do you have particular recommendations on simple things people could do now?
I showed you AdBlock Plus and Ghostery and so forth. These are very well known, hugely downloaded tools. Here's the problem. I run Firefox as my primary browser, and I have these tools running. However, there are sites that break. And so you have to be prepared that some sites will react badly to having these tools in play, and you have to make a decision. Now, there are sites out there that will say, we've spotted you've got an ad blocker running. We won't serve you any content until you turn it off. Well, that is then your decision as to whether you want to, the value of that data to you as to whether you still want to get it. And maybe you turn off the ad blocker for that site. There are some certain things, for example, I always, keep Chrome installed with no added tools in it. And I use that for sort of critical things like, well, in the past, obviously not recently, booking airplane tickets or hotels, because you might get a deal and then you have to complete the process. And if you don't complete the process because something blows up on your browser, or it takes a dislike to your ad blocker or tracking tool or whatever, you might lose the plane ticket and then not be able to, it might be you go back in 2 minutes time and suddenly it's much more expensive or there aren't one. So my recommendation is for what you might consider to be mission critical or time sensitive things, keep a second browser available that's wide open that sites won't object to, but try and do most of your digital life inside a space that you're controlling better. So yeah, AdBlock Pro, Decentralize is another one. I'm just looking here, the tools I was running here, extensions. I just throw in here, for example, Decentralize, Ghostery, Privacy Badger from EFF is good. AdBlock Plus is good. Am I Unique? I showed you about the fingerprinting stuff. There are a whole bunch of these things, and the most important thing is try them. See what works. If you don't like it, disable it, turn something else on. Does that work? Because your selection of the websites that you use on a day-to-day basis will be different to mine. And maybe something will break on your group of sites, which I don't see because I use a different selection of sites. So the thing to do is, these are mostly free tools. Download them, try them, see what works, adjust them, etc. Share settings amongst your friends. Tell people. And I've been telling people that a lot of my friends on Facebook are incredibly annoyed about Facebook going to this new design that they've done. But FB Purity has a tool. In fact, they've actually just released a completely standalone tool where you can force Facebook to go back to the old look and feel. And for some people, that's been a godsend. So share this information and get involved in it, and try and take some sort of control over your computing space. You're not a passive component in this. You know, part of this is taking control, taking responsibility of your stuff.
Okay, thank you. I think one last question, and then we need to sort of draw it a bit to an end. So, and this was for Philip Kaplan. John, if you are willing to pay $120 a year, how many of the 2 billion people who use the internet are likely to be prepared to do the same? Is that part of the issue?
That is definitely part of the issue. If I'm prepared to pay $120 a year, if Facebook, let's just take a nice simple example. If it was mandated, if I could wave a magic wand and say, you can't go onto Facebook or you can't go onto Twitter unless you actually have a properly authenticated account. Now, we can argue about what authenticated means, but let's just, let's not have the argument about whether that's a social security number or a credit card number or whatever, because that's a whole different set of discussion. But let's just wrap that up in authenticated. Yes, an enormous number of people are going to drop off those services, but the quality of what's left is going to be an awful awful lot better. The problem is those platforms have no interest in doing that. They have no interest whatsoever. They will, you know, if you look at what's going on about Facebook trying to shut down accounts of Russian infiltration of the voting process in America and all this stuff, this is essentially, at the end of the day, lip service, and it's lip service to keep the governments away from them, just far enough away that they can keep doing what they're doing while still allowing this sewer flow of stuff going through their platform. Because at the end of the day, that's what keeps their lights on. No, I fully accept that, you know, money should not be, and this is kind of the core point here, is paying for a service doesn't make you inherently identifiable, because you could go through PayPal and just drop some money. Yeah, you might ultimately have a route back to a credit card and therefore to a person. That's not the inherent solution. The workable solution is that there is a, you know, I post something into New Era Facebook and it has my digital certificate on it that says this was me and I'm traceable back to this trusted entity that knows who I am. There are various ways of doing this. You know, there's a whole different world of discussion we could talk about, because you could have governments issue these certificates. It could be your bank issue your certificate. You know, there are things you could do in terms of smart cards in hole in the wall, you know, where I load up a digital certificate onto a smart card or whatever. You know, there are ways and means by which I could actually build up a trustable profile of me by a number of digital certificates. I might have an NHS certificate, I might have a UK tax certificate, I might have a Barclays Bank certificate, I might have a, you know, member of the BMW Owners Club certificate or something, which would obviously be very low ranking compared to a banking one. This is the kind of discussion we need to have, but no one seems to want to have it at the moment, because the vested interests are all based around actually not giving a damn as to who these people are.
So I'll ask you a question from me. Sort of leading on from that, there's been some recent publication on proposals for government identification,
Yep.
and schemes for doing that and extending the current government electronic ID and so on.
Yep.
And I read some of the documents and I was quite interested to see that it didn't have the disadvantages that all of these systems tend to have, that, oh, all your information is in one place and therefore if you get hold of that information, you've got everybody's, you know, the full set.
Yep.
It was more it was an identifier that you could use to request from a database, does this person have this property, and that
Yep.
and rather than come and tell me all the properties this person has. So do you see that as being a, you know, something, if that sort of thing gets put up, gets built up and is usable, you know, that gives you a secure background that you can build on.
Extraordinarily good people doing some extraordinarily good work in this space, especially, for example, with regard to NHS data and the NHS patient record stuff. There are people who do, I mean, I can name names, but I won't embarrass them here, of people doing some, you know, I do some stuff with some of them and brainstorm stuff, and they are really passionate about this stuff. Okay, and more power to their elbow. Yes, absolutely. We have to recognize that a digital identity should not be all of you. Yeah, it should be an answer to a question that's valid and can be verified. Yeah, the problem I have with government-run solutions is that they're government-run solutions. And they tend not to be government run. They tend to be run by one of the big consultancy companies. And do I trust what they're going to do with it? You know, so I mean, I don't want to sound sort of too tinfoil hat paranoid about this, but the reality is that my digital identity has to be under my control, not government's control, not the NHS's control. They may provide aspects and elements of identity into my digital identity, but they are not the holder of my identity. That must be under my control, not anybody else's. And we have to come up with a framework that allows authenticators and validators to feed into my identity. A government digital identity may well be one of those. An NHS identity may be one of those, and so forth. But we have to make this sufficiently robust that it will stand up to the kind of information attack that will happen. because this kind of information will be incredibly valuable. And we have to make it in such a way that it's possible for the man on the street to understand and use. This is no small problem. But if we're not going to start doing this, when are we ever going to get this? Because are we going to be having this discussion in 20 years' time saying, well, digital identity, yeah, that would be a really quite useful thing to have. That's not acceptable. Yeah. And my let's take an example. My NHS record should have my digital identity attached to it, and I should be able to manage access to that record in a way that works for everybody, in a way that it is viable and valid for my GP. It works for, et cetera, et cetera. But my digital identity has to be owned and managed by me, and I have to choose what identifiers and authenticators feed into it, and then a third party requesting, is this person on this service this person that they claim to be, and what is their trust rating? Do they only have one identity in their ID bag, for want of a better term, and it is membership of the local football club, or is there a higher validity in there of maybe it's a bank validating them, or an NHS record validating them, or something, And then there's a huge market for people or services to provide granularized identity to people who can then build a composite identity which can then be queried and then trusted and evaluated depending upon context. So this is the real big problem, and there are some incredibly good people in government and NHS and so forth working on this, and absolutely we should be supporting them. But this doesn't go anywhere unless we can have at least a conversation with the man in the street as to what's going on at the moment. And there we really do have a big problem.
Thank you. And I think we have to draw it to an end. So I would like to thank John for his time, for his fascinating.
Thank you for the invitation and for putting up with my ranting.
I mean, I've worked in cybersecurity for a long time, and I recognise a lot of it. I was glad to see I have most of the add-ins on my browser that you were showing. But I also have a daughter who I have to sort of battle with this generational thing about quite happily giving her identity away, but I get free stuff, and it's I see it as a big challenge, and certainly a very stimulating conversation. So thank you for your time. I'm sure there would be a good round of applause, but unfortunately, everybody's muted up. So thank you.
Thank you for everyone for coming.
So thank you for your time. Just before we finish, I'd like to just make a couple of notices to everybody who's on the call. We have our AGM on October the 14th. Again, it'll be a virtual meeting, so I hope as many of you as possible will join that. We are looking for new members of the committee, and I am standing down as chairman, so we are looking for a new chair. And then on the 21st, we have our next monthly meeting, and it's a talk on education in user experience design. So helping us to understand how we can design applications that are easier to work with, with a good user interface. So I don't know if John's still around.
Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah.
To say? Do you have anything to add, John, before we finish?
No, I'd just like to thank you, John, for coming on and giving us an interesting talk. If people want to applaud, they can unmute themselves, because I've just unmuted them from my end.
No, it's fine. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. So this was our first branch meeting by using this tool. I'm sure we'll get better at it. But thank you for your patience, and next time we'll try and make sure we can enable everybody to ask questions directly. I think the problem was everybody's muted twice. They're muted at their end and they're muted at our end, and we have to make sure both of them get turned off. So we'll work on that for next time. So thank you all. Thank you, John, and good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.